welcome with me on stage the TST members of the core project. So there's Larry Peterson, and he's also the chief architect and the team lead of the TST. Saurav, Matteo, Ogus, and we haven't yet met in person, Andy, right? So having been around yesterday in the office, but I didn't see you, and David Bainbridge from Siena. So the TST, basically, in case you haven't had a chance to see how the process is, how people get elected. There's information on the wiki, so this is certainly the voice for the community, and the TST those are the shepherds for the core project. So they are responsible for all the technical decisions and structure of the code base, which is pretty important in order to maintain quality, of course, and alignment with the roadmap. So let's start with the first question, maybe. And I think the talk, the previous talk and discussion on the roadmap set a perfect stage for our panel. So if I could extend the question to the TST members and the panel, what do you think what is probably the biggest challenge that happened over the course of the last year in light of the development of the core project? So maybe Larry, if we can
maybe we should start the other way, since I've been talking so much.
So David, you've got the mic, so then that's perfect, please.
All right. Biggest challenge, is that on? Check. Okay, the biggest challenge I think continues to be building Chord. The amount of effort it takes to actually get things up and running, and building it's half of it, right? Once you have it up and running or compiled, really, getting it deployed, particularly in my focus has been on physical deployment. So it's getting it on the physical machines, getting the fabric configured, getting everything worked together so that you can actually have, in an ARD-Chord case, connectivity from a device behind a PON all the way up to the internet, including using like a Quagga router to get through the fabric up into the internet. Getting that is no small effort that takes many hours of compute time, Slack time, email time, and phone time to get it going. And even a bigger challenge when they tried to do it in China.
So has it gotten any better though in the past year?
Yes. Yes.
So I work on the build system, and so that's why I have a personal stake in getting that yes from David. So I think in the past year we have, just to kind of amplify on what David said, we have been working on the challenges with getting Chord set up. We've also been trying to in the build system, trying to be forward-looking and start thinking about addressing some of the challenges that we've heard the last couple of days about flexibility in Chord, being able to swap out different components, being able to integrate Chord with existing infrastructure. And so we don't have yet a solution to those problems. That's the challenges for the next year, I think. But at least we've, in the past year, been laying the foundation for those things, I hope. I think that's been the biggest challenge that we've addressed in the build system this past year.
In the case of mChord, basically it is a combination of what you just heard, but on top of it, making sure that the already very complicated 3GPP system is fully integrated into Chord with all of the peripherals, the base stations, connectivity is maintained, and at the same time, all of the innovations that come on the path towards 5G in the sense of disaggregated EPC, disaggregated RAN, and an on-OS control of the peripherals, a programmable base station, and getting it all to work has been the biggest challenge.
So as Andy and David said, we put a lot of effort this release to support the deployment and the developers. What I think we should focus during the next year is to really work to support operability of the system. We need to build experience in there. We need your help to have requirement, how you want to operate core, that what kind of feedback you need to receive from the platform. I think this is a great challenge for the next few months.
Yeah, so in addition to the things that have already been said, one particular challenge that we've faced over the last year, at least in one flavor of Chord, which is residential Chord, is that we really struck, the pieces that fall into Chord, like the Fabric and XOS and bare metal switches, bare metal compute, all those pieces we had. But when it came to the peripherals, we could not offer as a reference platform, as a reference implementation of residential Chord, we could not offer an OLT or an ONU or open source software that manages that OLT and ONU in residential Chord. So two things changed over the course of the year that were really positive for Chord as an open source reference implementation. The first thing that happened was that this effort that was led by AT&T and started sometime last year as a small brigade to develop this piece of software called Volta, which stands for Virtual OLT Hardware Abstraction. That stuff was formalized into a project under the Chord umbrella in May of this year. And if you're familiar with Volta, it's completely open source code that serves as a common management framework for multi-vendor OLTs and ONU. So we formalized that into a project, brought in started a community around it, had all the development put into Jira with proper planning for releases and sprints and so on. So that was a big step forward. The second thing that happened was that we were able to develop this white box OLT based on merchant silicon from Broadcom. So that's an edge core OLT, and then develop the adapter in Volta that works with that edge core OLT. So we did our first demonstration of that at BBWF, Broadband World Forum in Berlin, a couple of weeks back. And we are going to spend the rest of the year integrating that with Chord. So we will have a reference implementation of residential Chord with the peripherals for the first time.
I think I don't need this mic. Can you hear me? Or do
Should
I?
I speak up a little bit? I don't know. Maybe they have to turn it back on.
Which mic should I use? Okay, now you got it.
You can just keep it there.
Keep it out of the way. So yeah, the point Saurabh just made is huge, is that we now have the open source and available hardware to actually have a full and complete R-Chord. So here's what I think has been the biggest challenge. You've heard me talk about 4.0 is really 1.0. If we had been able to be stealth for the last year, we could have gotten there faster and probably ended up with a cleaner system. But the biggest challenge that I see is that we got, and this is a great, great, great thing, we got so much interest from the community. People started to deploy and start to use the software as we were building it. And so at every release, you're trying as hard as you can to get the people using the previous release up to speed and working, while simultaneously trying to solve the problems in the right way for the very problems they're suffering in the old system. So I'm going to borrow an example from John Hartman. It's as though you're building a house, but you have to live in it as you build it. And so every 4 months, you better end up in a place that you can live in while you build the rest of the house. That's a challenging thing, but the beauty of it is we got lots and lots of feedback, which helped us build, I think, a better house at the end, hopefully. But I think it feels to me like we've gotten to a foundation that those incremental changes will now start compounding better than putting up 2 befores and framing. So I hope we're in a good place with that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. So am I still, do you still hear me? Hello, hello.
Yep.
So, having heard about the challenges, I think also there's always, challenges are also opportunities in a way, right? And so we heard already that now, after also, I think, a very quick uptake in some of the more recent components or subsystems, as for example, Volta, now there's a better availability with regards to the components needed actually to really have the end-to-end system, right, in place to also approve the stack and implementation. So maybe if we now look into more the opportunities, and I think some were already mentioned. So when we just start again, Larry, what do you think going forward? What are the biggest opportunities then for the coming year, and actually in order to, implement the roadmap and solve some of these challenges?
So I hopefully everyone has heard the message very clearly that the big opportunity going forward is to bring services on board. And the larger that set, the more interesting Chord becomes to the various people that might be considering adopting it, the more stress that puts on the platform that we then go off and solve those problems, the richer the platform becomes as a consequence. So it's all about services at this point in my mind, and looking for those opportunities. When we started, M and R and eChord were silos by and large, but that's because the legacy business units were siloed and the legacy infrastructure was siloed, and we have an opportunity to break those barriers down. And so I'm hoping that we see a lot of that activity in the next year.
So that means a sort of unification of
unification.
of the system for the different profiles that have been developed.
Yeah, and as we disaggregate, we will find more opportunities that those smaller, less bundled components can now be reused. Hopefully, that's the outcome that we see.
Okay, thanks.
So I think the big opportunity that is coming is really for us to just learn more. What you've heard yesterday is that there are a number of field trials and lab trials leading to field trials that are happening. You heard it from AT&T, you heard it from Deutsche Telekom, NTT, Telefonica, China Mobile, China Unicom. So our big opportunity over here is to learn from them. And I say learn because everyone is doing things slightly differently, because everyone has their own environment. Just as an example, I can say that with AT&T, in residential Chord, we're working on XGS-PON, which is 10 gigabit symmetric PON, 10 gigabit downstream, 10 gigabit upstream. And that's based on GPON standards. But NTT, and in Japan, they would want to do it slightly differently. They want GE-PON, right? The Ethernet-based framing instead of the ATM-based framing that is used in GPON. When you talk to Deutsche Telekom, they would be less concerned about XGS-PON right now, but they are really, really interested in GPON and G.fast. So everyone does things slightly differently. And for us, who are we are building a reference platform, we really, really want to learn from them these different variations that we can build and make the base platform richer.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back at the last 6 to 8 months, we put a huge effort in refactoring the platform and stabilizing it and modularizing it. So I think that for us, the main opportunity is now to take advantage of this new stable API and provide new services, help the community to grow, get feedback from the experience in the community and from the field trial, and keep on improving the platform now that we can call it 1.2.
So Matteo, then when you say this is a stable API, maybe you could drill a little bit more into that and explain a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so this comes back to what Larry said either yesterday and today. We have been working on this platform, and there was that much interest that people started working on it while we were creating it. So one of the main problems we have seen and the community has reported in the past year was that the API were rapidly changing. So it was difficult for anyone to keep up with all these changes. with the last refactoring we did, we were really focusing create an API that will not radically change over time. This means that it's not yet carved in stone. There will be small changes, and we are going, of course, to introduce new features and new possibilities. But we are now on a stable platform that you can just take and use.
I guess I will echo pretty much what Larry and Saurav has mentioned. Now with the mobile world, 5G is fast approaching, and with that, all of the service providers are in increasing pressure to actually start planning on how to actually deploy that. And we are at the right time where mCord is really one of the options. And coupled with that, we have this year a great new opportunity with the open source EPC that Intel and Sprint has worked on, which is proving in terms of the core connectivity service, proving to be very scalable. So we are in a position where everything is aligning nicely. We have a core platform that is significantly more stable, and we have the basic connectivity services, which comes with it as open source, that is quite scalable. And in the course of last 4 months, all of a sudden, as far as the peripherals are concerned, the base stations, we went from one base station that was integrated into mCord into now many, and some of which are also deployment grade small cells, outdoor small cells. So things are aligning nicely, and at this stage, as the interest from the service providers increase, along with lab trials and potential field trials, we'll get things even better.
Okay, so this is boring, but so I've also been thinking about field trials as a big opportunity for Chord, making the Chord platform and the Chord use cases much better in the coming year. So we've heard, and I spoke a little while ago about the capabilities for more modularity in the Chord build system now that we've been working on. And now I think we need to start taking that to the next level and really trying to integrate in field trials, integrate Chord or components of Chord with operator infrastructures and start getting requirements back about, what does this really mean? I think that's going to be one of the key challenges that we face with this opportunity of field trials, setting up this feedback loop between the teams in the community that are doing field trials and the teams that are developing the Chord use cases and the teams that are developing the Chord platform and doing deployments, setting up the right communication and feedback between all of these people, so we take this really valuable information from the field trials and feed it back into the process and make sure that the Chord platform really responds to that.
Could I second something that you just said? When people at ONF are involved in field trials, which often happens, we have a seat at the table to understand what that feedback is. But then we have learned over time of deployments and field trials and so on that we had no clue about. Those are missed opportunities from the community's point of view to learn about what happened. So hopefully we're getting some processes and so on in place. The use case steering team is an example of that. It would be good to know if you deployed and tested Chord in some way that isn't widely known, that the community can hear about that.
So I think in order to get more field trials going, even get to the deployment stage, we have to make Chord more deployable. And that has to be easier to ramp up. I think some of the container work going forward is going to help there. I really should be able to start this with one command and let it go. Additionally, when you're in field trial or post-field trial, there has to be the capability within the system for troubleshooting, diagnostics, so that if something fails as an operator or as an integrator, I have the possibility, without going back to Slack and the development community every time, to figure out what's going on. And so we've stabilized the API, which is great, but when I have a running system, it's not necessarily stable over a long period of time. If I soak that for 2 weeks or a month, I'm going to find a whole bunch of issues that carriers will find when they try to put this into a long-term field trial. And how do you debug that? How do you go back and support this long-term? And I think those issues need to be addressed as a challenge going forward, including things as simple as HA. If something fails, I shouldn't have to redeploy the system. Capturing those, and hopefully some of the container work will help there, at least surface these issues to get us to that next stage.
And so just then maybe picking up on that point, so for the high availability, right, do you think there's a way of, for all of these different profiles, to have a kind of a common, let's say a common process and a capability within the system, within the platform, in order to support that, so that all of these different use cases can make use of that? I mean, right now, right, we have those within different subsystems. For example, within ONOS, I think Volta has been designed and architected in order to cater for that. But how do you see that? Is there something where you could say, well, if we go to, for example, Kubernetes, we have a common means of doing that in the platform, so that all of these use cases, which certainly need that, can make use of it?
I think going to a container orchestration system like Kubernetes provides some of the groundwork, but that in and of itself won't give you HA, right? That means a container stops, it'll be restarted. But if that container or microservice isn't built with the concept that I'm running in this environment, where something I depend on may go away and restart at any time, or I may go away, restart at any time, or I've got to separate my state. So there's a whole bunch of best practices around how you build these components that if you don't do, you won't get the high availability anyway, right? It's not, Kubernetes doesn't solve the problem. It's a tool that we can help leverage. On top of that, we have some physical limitations that are interesting in terms of high availability, right? A OLT is connected on a physical switch. I can't do anything about that. That link goes down, I'm in trouble, right? And so we have some unique problems in terms of HA that have to be dealt with as well. Some of the work in the fabric, going dual homing, great work, right? Needs to be there. But again, troubleshooting switches. If something, the OFDPA has a problem, how do I troubleshoot that? How do I deal with HA on that? Those have to be addressed as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That so for as an example, ONOS, it's not just the HA; it's also then the in-service software upgrade, which is a variant of things change, and you have to be able to support that.
Well, you talked about that, and ONOS in-service software upgrade being different than perhaps Horde or XOS, and I thought, why? I'll just kill a container and start another version of it with the new software, right? We can again take advantage of some of this concept of microservices to give us in-service upgrades without having to say, okay, ONOS is done one way, XOS is done another way, right? All I have to do is in Kubernetes or Swarm and say, look, I want to start a container with this version now. Just kill a container, rely on the HA capabilities, and again, there's some constraints around that, and let the new container come up. I feel like I'm turning, I don't know why. Pardon me a moment. So I think if we talk through this as a community, we can come up with some common patterns that we can leverage through the container management systems. Again, following best practices to get some consistency across it, and that'll make the system easier to support in the long run as well.
Right. So Kubernetes as a tool works if you've adopted best practices, and we just need to do that uniformly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any further thoughts on this topic? Oh, right. So obviously this is a very important one when it comes to, let's say, bridging between the prototype stage and getting that into a field trial already even, right? And taking it even further. So probably there needs to be even some more uptake on that. And when there's a common means of doing that, then certainly you've got also a simpler process overall. And I think that was already discussed somehow as very relevant on the roadmap.
So consistent with that is scale. I mean, we've not stressed performance yet. We've been working on functionality primarily.
Yeah, a lot of it is I don't want to invent things. I'm lazy, right? If there's a way out there to do it, we should do it. And the community around containers and orchestration have at least got ideas of how to do things. We should leverage those, right? And that I think is key. Is let's not try to be unique.
But so I have a question. What should be the process for addressing these HA issues and getting them into Cord? There's a performance brigade that is looking at DPTK integration and SRIOV. I know there's a container brigade. Should there be an HA brigade, or is this something that falls under the purview of the container brigade, or do you have any ideas there?
As I understand brigades, and David's right over there, so he's like the authoritative person on brigades, is brigades are designed to come up with a product, do something. So there's do something and there's talk about doing something. So before we create an HA brigade, I think there has to be a discussion about how are we going to do it. And I'm not sure that that's in a brigade context or just in a community discussion context or even a TST discussion context. And that has to happen first. And once we kind of go on a decision or we need some ideas tested out, that's when I think we launch into a brigade and get volunteers to actually do the work. And then, as Larry pointed out, bring that work back in to the discussion to figure out the next steps.
Yeah, so you make a good point. We have a gap in the email goes so far, Slack goes so far. We need a concerted effort to have these design discussions before we launch into doing the work. I mean, what we've done now is we've launched brigades and then they go off and think as opposed to go off and do. But and then that's it's an interest group for a while, and maybe that's okay. But
the problem is in the container brigade group, my fault, fully claim responsibility for it. You know, I got pulled off in other things, and into Gopi came in, there was like nothing happened, right? And so that's the problem. How do you keep the brigades going as people get pulled off in different directions? So if they have a target to do something, and we talked about this in the meeting yesterday, if you target to do something, actual physical, you can get volunteers to do it. When you have ideas, people come in because they're interested, but nothing necessarily happens.
I think that is pretty good. Point when we think about. I mean, you all emphasized that the interaction with the community is key, right? And now looking at the next year and what is actually there and the opportunities, more field trials, and opportunities to learn from them. So I heard this from actually all of you. What do you think? What is the best way actually to bring in such feedback? So how could the community, how could people who worked on field trials, certainly typically using a part or a specific profile with priorities on a specific use case, how could they, in the best case, bring back their experiences into Cord, into the Cord community? So, I mean, you can start with whoever would like to go first from you. So, Sarah, yes.
Yeah, so everyone that is doing a field trial or even a lab trial leading to a field trial has, not everyone has been as open about the issues that they have faced yet. We are, Larry mentioned this before, some things we are directly involved with, and so we are learning and already incorporating that as new features. I'll give an example of that. There's work that we are doing which said that, look, if you're using trellis and you're using the leaf spine fabric, we absolutely, not even in production, forget about production, but not even in a field trial can we afford putting trellis in if it does not support dual homing, if it doesn't have that HA capability. If you lose a top of rack switch, you're going to lose the entire rack. So you have to have dual top of rack switches. And so we spent the entire summer building that dual homing capability. And that's because we are directly involved with this particular provider who's doing this work for the field trial. So we got that direct feedback and we put that effort into it. But there are other providers that we have not been working directly and they have been working over a year on this in their labs, and they want to take it to trial, and we just haven't heard enough feedback from them. We're just getting engaged with them. So a discussion of more open issues going into field trials is critical for us to be able to take benefit of that opportunity to learn more and enrich the system.
So I see a seam there. I would propose that the use case steering team not only come up with new projects and priorities, but also it's populated pretty strongly by carriers as a channel for getting the feedback from the trials that have already happened. That needs to happen somewhere. I mean, TST is another place, but the more places that happen, the better.
So, brutal honesty here. I'm a vendor, or I come from a company that's a vendor that is involved in POCs and field trials, competitive POCs and field trials that run concurrently. So one of the realities is we're trying to make money. And when we're in a competitive situation, both from a financial point of view and a technology point of view, it doesn't always benefit us to come forward and expose ourselves and all our own weaknesses and stuff into a community where we know our competitors are and are in a concurrent competitive or a concurrent competitive POC. And I've got to assume my competitors or our competitors are doing the same thing, right? And so that's a tension here in the open source community when we have vendors that play in concurrent competitive POCs. I don't know how to address that. I mean, all vendors do bring some of it back, but we're not going to be completely honest, right? Up front. I don't know how else this is why they don't give me a mic. This is why my company doesn't like me on stage. But so Juan, don't tell anybody. Don't record this, right? But this is the reality of it that we have to deal with as a vendor. And I think this is some of the reason that some of these field trials, the TST and the community is not getting back. We bring it back as we can and as it works in our business model. But it doesn't always mean it's brought back immediately. It's brought back eventually, but not necessarily immediately.
Yes, Larry? Oh,
So this is kind of a chicken and egg problem. I understand the complexity and all the constraints that being a vendor and trying to make money bring to the project. But most of the time, the best way to resolve a problem is to be aware of the problem. So as people do field trials and lab trial, I can understand that not always they can come back with a solution, but if they just can come back, we had this problem and we need to find a way to solve it, that is something that on the long term will benefit everyone, because we don't really have the resource to deploy a system and run a system and operate a system all the time. So just bringing feedback on what is working good, what is not, can help us a lot. And also, when you're trying to face this problem or solve particular issues, like I was talking yesterday with someone that solved the CI/CD on Cord in his own way, and then found out that we solved the exact same problem in a different way. Try to bring those up, and we can all help each other in some cases, or at least try.
okay, so that's an offer to at least have a focal point, have an open ear, and invite feedback on specific issues that came up. So they are, of course, at a time where they can be, publicly talked about. Right? Yeah.
So we've got 5 nonprofit guys sitting between a vendor and a carrier.
So you're not in between. You're
Is that a joke?
We're all standing in the same row. So,
Well, no, just right, the competitive issue that you raise is a good one.
yeah.
And I sort of have the same, I want to ask you the same question. So DT does a trial and you also compete with your competitors, obviously, but do you see it different? It would seem to me to be in the operator's best interest to make all of these issues known to as many people as possible. So they're all working on it.
Yeah, definitely. it's a bit unfair to ask the moderator, but no, it's as I said, we are all in the same row. And in the next moment, I also would like to extend the question to the room. But yeah, so from an operator's perspective, of course, you have priorities, and you cannot necessarily in the early stages, talk about everything that came up, since then you would kind of expose what is the specific case that you are solving. However, I think whenever it comes to the platform components and the use of them, so I think there might be different levels within the system where issues could be discovered, and looking at the platform, certainly, then it should be to the interest of all to make them available to the community as early as possible to be worked on. So certainly there's the opportunity to interact much closer with the ONF core team once carriers are partners, right? So in the case of Deutsche Telekom, so luckily that's the case. However, we are, fully supportive for the openness to everyone else as well who's working on that. And I was pretty surprised seeing mail coming in on the list. I don't remember exactly what it was about. There was some organization, I think in Australia or somewhere at probably another end of the world, just speaking up and saying, hey, by the way, we were just using, I think it was ONOS, for a specific use case. I don't recall it at this moment, but they were just saying like, hey, we just want to thank you for the great work you're doing. So it's particularly at that point that even for those smaller organizations that might be already using components, right? And so leveraging core components or ONOS, then you don't actually know about them, since they were just not so big to make a big buzz about it like the carriers typically would do. I think that's just a good example. So in some cases, it's about timing, right? So those, I think this particular example came also quite late. And people didn't come because they discovered an issue, but they just wanted to actually, reach out and make appreciation, right, to the work, to the great work that the community does. But at this point, I don't know, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I actually just want to agree with you. I think, Larry, the information eventually does get back. It's all about the timing and when it gets back. And that's where it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. But maybe at this point, we can extend it to the room, yes? So if you could briefly state your name and affiliation if you like. You don't have to, but maybe it helps to set context. Yeah, is it working?
This is working?
Put the mic over here, please.
This one on?
You can repeat the question.
Yeah, so I can repeat the question. Yeah. It looks like on, yeah.
Nope. So when it comes to Kubernetes, how are you going to handle, and this is going to be a long question, how are you going to handle the versioning? And I say this because between different versions, I've worked with it in the serverless frameworks. They've broken it version to version by introducing RBAC. All the serverless frameworks were then broken, had to be brought in. Not all of them are in yet. The networking components were broken in some releases so that you could only use Calico is broken and Flannel is broken. I don't know if that's been fixed yet. Then in 0.71 and 7.2, kubedns was no longer launching. So, you've got all those problems that are going version to version. The versions are coming out very quickly. You can get like a couple versions within a span of a couple days. So how are you going to control that problem so that it doesn't become a huge support issue?
Gopi, where are you?
See, I look at that as a very difficult question with an easy answer. We don't know. I mean, that's going to be the honest truth. I think we're going to have to find a release of Kubernetes that solves most of our issues and say, look, we're going to stick with this until we're ready to evolve to another release that either solves the problem we're running into or we're ready to go, right? We're not going to be able to stay on the head of Kubernetes. That's just going to kill us.
Same
So-
thing we did with OpenStack, which is we're just a little behind the curve there, but
Yeah.
it's stable.
I do think, we don't want to get as far back as we are on OpenStack. But we do have to move, but we do have to move very carefully and be as static as we can. Uh-oh, he's coming back.
Yeah. I think there's another mic over here, by the way. I think. Is it still there or not? Yeah.
So then just, I guess, not so much a question, more of a statement. So you had mentioned that in Kubernetes, if for HA, I just shoot one in the head and the other one pops up. That assumes that it's not sharing state anywhere. So if it's sharing state anywhere, then it is actually up to the application developer to ensure that state is transferred. So it's not as simple as just boom, gone, right?
So that is part of the design that we've pulled at least as much control state out of the individual apps and maintain it at the layer above the service control plane. But you're absolutely right.
Okay.
I can pass this around.
Does this work? Try. Oh, that's all right.
Works. So I want to sort of change the direction of discussion a little bit. What is TSD doing to basically enhance the process of onboarding the collaborators in terms of as fast as possible? There are many collaborators who can come forward, and they do come forward to bring in their VNFs or collaborate with MCORD and all of that. What are you guys are planning to do to accelerate that? And just like, I think Tom Anxious mentioned yesterday in our discussion that, it was only when SDKs for iPhone came about that Apple application developers mushroomed up. What can we do to also do the same thing in terms of, mushrooming out this VNF onboarding from different vendors and all of that? How do we accelerate that such that we get to, better deployment?
So thanks for the question, Tom, because this is a huge part of what we have been focusing in the last few months. Along with more stable API, the system is now more modular, so it's way easier to bring in your VNF. As Larry said in the roadmap, we have a design to work on a static checker for your VNF. So theoretically, you shouldn't even need to spin up a virtual pod or a development pod to test your VNF, but you can just run it through this step of validation, and then create a profile, onboard it on a running pod, and verify that it works. From a more TST level standpoint, I think the all of us has always been really open in providing feedback to collaboration proposal. We had some issues in the past month with time zone with collaborators that had troubles joining the meeting. So we moved to a different schema, and we're having meeting in the morning one week and in the afternoon the following week, so that no matter in which time zone you are, but you have the opportunity every 2 weeks to join and come in with your proposal.
I do have a question on that one, actually. You talked about static checking of VNFs, which is great, don't get me wrong. What about test harnesses so that I can do runtime checking of a VNF without running a full-time pod, inject traffic, both good and bad traffic, verify, get out, kind of a test harness situation?
So I don't think we have anybody here on the stage from the QA team at ONF, but yeah, I think that would maybe fall in there.
So
in their purview.
the scenarios take us towards that you can do a mock scenario, a single. What are there, 5 or 6 scenarios? Only one of which is an actual pod. The others are. It's towards an SDK. It's not an SDK. That's kind of what we're shooting for. But you're right.
And yeah, this is a great point, because we can statically validate your service. We need something to achieve the same on VNF. I will say that we have a base step for that in our code, where we have a test client that can inject traffic into the network. Talking with people, there is a lot of interest in having a similar fake client for the M-Cord scenario and the E-Cord scenario. So if there is someone that is interested in helping us creating these two components, that would be welcome.
So I have another thought on this question. What I've observed is that there are many stakeholders in this process. And when we started, it was a set of individuals playing multiple roles. And when you do that, you don't recognize that I just switched from being a service developer to being a system integrator. And then I switched to being an operator because I wear all the hats. And so I'm not really careful about making sure that the divisions are clear. And just very, very simple example, the service developer wants to work on their service and they don't have to want to worry about the rest of RCord. The system integrator needs to be able to work on all of RCord, which spans multiple services, yada, yada, yada. So it's a matter of slowly but surely learning that we've been wearing multiple hats and that we need to know when we're taking one off and putting one on. Core development's different than service development. And actually a lot of the people that contributed up to this point have been core developers. And so they're more concerned about system integration end to end and don't maybe put quite the priority on testing one service at a time. But that's a direction that we're trying to move in.
Larry, is this working? Okay, hello. So I had a question which is related to this, and this is more not to the TST as much as to the community. We have been told multiple times by people in other open source forums like OPNFV, like BBF, that Cord is a good platform to bring and stand up in those kind of environments where other VNF vendors can use that as in daily use. So I'm hoping that some people who are here are also members of those forums and active in those forums. So if there is some collaborators who can take Cord as a platform into those forums, stand it up and help create this environment where where VNFs and other things can be tested, it will be a very useful thing for the project.
Mm-hmm. So
that was more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. Thanks very much. You got the mic.
I saw Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Brian. Anyway, my name is Brian O'Connor from ONF. The question I have is two-part. There's a lot of talk in this panel and in Cord in general about VMs and containers as the mode for delivering VNFs. And my question is, is containers or VMs or some virtualization technology the only mode for introducing network functions? Looks like by your show of heads, hand or waving no. But for hardware acceleration, for smart NICs, NPUs, smart switches, programmable switches, what is the model going forward for introducing those types of functions and managing those functions within the Cord context?
August, you have your hand up.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think we have an answer for that. Cord today does not do heterogeneity very well. If we have a certain kind of switches, we expect those kind of switches. If we have a certain kind of server or a server configuration, mostly we expect that kind of a server configuration. But going forward, what we've been hearing from folks is that we're never going to have a homogeneous environment. So that kind of intelligence has to be built in.
Yeah. I completely agree. So if you move up the stack and think about Cord as a whole, the hardware, he's absolutely right. We're very limited in what hardware we can take at any given time. But it's already the case that Cord tries to accept your VNF, whether it's in a container or a VM or an ONOS app. And I consider that a ... that as we discover other modes of delivering VNFs or services that can be accommodated, the technology just changes too rapidly to have locked into any particular one. So it's absolutely an architectural priority, but integrating each one of those technologies is going to be a little bit different. When it comes to accelerators, it's an interesting question whether we hide that under the cloud layer or expose it at the topmost layer. I don't know what the right answer to that one is.
Are there further thoughts or questions on this topic from the room? Since it sounds like It sounds like one of the issues that go a little bit beyond a pure virtualization, BNF onboarding, and somehow have impact on the architecture. Right. Okay, if not, are there other questions? And so this is a great chance to have the full power of the TST on stage here. So if not, I think then maybe we have one more point that we could discuss a little bit, and so that is actually whenever points come up. So there's certainly the mailing list, right, where people could reach out to with any technical question, with proposals, thoughts. Do you see any other means of interaction? Is there some other wiki or point where you would like to point people to? There are certainly recordings for the meetings as well. So what would you suggest?
So there's, it's a little bit problematic because it's Google Docs, but there is, well, first of all, there's a public calendar. If you don't know about the CORD public calendar, learn about it because the TST meetings are scheduled there. There are two main places where it just happens that work gets done, and they're both in Google Docs. One is in a folder on sprint and release planning, where all the record of what's on the roadmap and what we're going to try to do in the next release gets recorded. And there's a second folder called Core Design Notes, where on a per release basis, Satisfying Cactus, Shared Delusion, Dangerous Edition, and so on, there will be, anytime someone has a problem on how to solve the container problem or whatever, they fire up a Google Doc, and that's where people rally around and just make notes, because email is a problem. I know Google Docs is not necessarily the best thing, but it's just be aware that that's there, and those are the two specific places where a lot of design ongoing work happens.
Get on Slack, communicate on Slack, and make your voice known. Come to the TST meetings, they're open, right? This is not a closed session. And don't just come to the TST meetings and sit there. Talk. Actually, if we say something stupid, I do it all the time, stand up and say that's stupid. Ask the tough questions, push the issues. If you don't, we make decisions, or other people make decisions in a void, in a vacuum. You know, the example of the Kubernetes question, right? Oh, in 7.71, something didn't work. Well, we might assume it does work if you don't bring it up. So it is a community thing that you've got to have your voice. And if you get a voice and you show up, sooner or later you may end up on stage. And how fun could that be?
So apart the TST, I just want to remember there are other meetings that are marked on the CORD calendar. There are Brigade meeting, QA meeting, and there are a lot of meetups that happens around CORD all around the world. We have an ambassador program that you are welcome to take a look at. If you are interested in hosting events, you can talk to David or William to get support for that. So if there is one thing we can really be proud of, it is that we are a really open community. So there are a lot of open doors. Just walk in and bring your thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, so if there are other meetings, TST is once a week, but that stays pretty high level CORD wide. There's a platform meeting once a week. There's eCORD meetings, there's mCORD meetings, there's rCORD or Volta meetings. There's QA meetings. They're all on the public calendar. If one of those is of interest to you, just show up. They're all, I mean, we probably need to do a better job of spreading them across time zones, which we've done with the TST, morning, afternoon, alternating weeks. But show up at that first one in the middle of the night and complain about it, and it'll get, something will be done about it, I think.
All right, great. So with that, I think that's very nice. So there's multiple ways of interaction, and so the call for participation to the community was made. With that, then I think, let me thank you very much for this great panel discussion.